Um, so good evening, everyone. My name is Erin Zwerko. I'm the Director of Planning and Development for the town of Yarmouth. Joining me tonight is Julie Dubofsky, our Assistant Planner, and Colin Durant, our Chair of the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee. Thank you for joining us tonight to hear about the South Street Advisory Lane project that we are undertaking as a town in the next several months. We are excited to share a little bit more information about the background of the project, our conceptual plan, and offer some time to gather additional feedback from those who are joining us. And so without further ado, I will turn it over to Julie to take us through the presentation. I think with such a small group, if there are questions midway through, I think we can handle them as they come up rather than saving them for the end of the evening. And like I said, we will record this presentation and post it publicly available with the presentation that Julie will give for folks that were not able to attend this evening. So thank you again, and we'll get right to it. Thank you, Julie.
Okay, can everyone see my screen? Yeah, okay, great. So we just have a couple of slides just to give some background for anyone who is unfamiliar. And then most importantly, as Erin mentioned, is your thoughts or concerns or anything that we might have missed. So it's very brief. It'll just go over the project history, description, in case anyone isn't familiar with advisory lanes, next steps, and then questions and answers, hopefully. So community concerns. This project comes from requests that we heard in regards to drivers on South Street failing to share the roadway. It is already what's called a yielding roadway, in which drivers are accustomed to pulling over to the side to share the space for passing vehicles, but also residents concerned about drivers speeding on the straightaway. And then in particular, the curve towards West Elm Street that has some limited sight distance for oncoming road users. So in the view below, you can see that this is a kid who's biking on their way to school in the morning, but also for pedestrians who are correctly walking, opposing oncoming traffic. The curve this time of year can be a little tricky. So that's and for anyone who doesn't know, advisory bike lanes they have a number of different names that are commonly used now. You have edge lane roads, edge shoulder, dashed bicycle lane. For this case, we're going to call them, refer to them as advisory lanes because they kind of clarify the specific space for pedestrian, bicyclists, or also known as vulnerable users, and from motorists. And the idea is also to prioritize non-motorists that little to no widening of the roadways. Many of you know the rural roads don't often have sidewalks. Sometimes there are sufficient shoulders. So advisory lanes are shown to be a really helpful rural roadways application and a form of traffic calming as well. So there are certain criteria that have to be met. They have to be applied to narrow, low to moderate volume roadways with two-way vehicle traffic, also known as South Street. But I'm sure many of you are familiar with the other advisory lanes installed throughout the community. And a little background on the project history. The Bicycle and Pedestrian Committee, which Colin has been a part of, has been installing these throughout the community since 2016 and really looking at a network approach, a whole system of how to make the roads safer for all users. So South Street was initially part of the 2021 installation, but it was delayed due to some road resurfacing. So it has a number of users any time of day, but it's you know, as being part of the village core context, similar to Bates and Bodwin, it has in Cumberland, it has a lot of users I don't know if anyone's familiar with Morton Road or Bridge Street or even Old Shipyard, which is one of the newer ones. But those are also have, or at least have become common routes also for community, even more so because of the advisory lanes. So the project scope here is South Street from Main Street, as you can see on the graphic, from to West Elm. And it's pretty simple for anyone who's not familiar. It's just dashed lanes at the periphery of the roads, for basically extending along South Street from Main to West Elm. It'll also include double yellow centerline road markings at the beginning or entry of South Street, so pretty much 50 feet from Main Street and from West Elm. There'll be informational signage posted at the start of each segment to kind of clarify what a driver's responsibilities are on the road if they're not already aware. And then it may include flexible delineators, which are those white tubular posts that have reflective tape around them. And they may be used to create a gateway environment, which would further slow turning vehicles into the approach of the street. But those are still under consideration. So this is an image of the kind of conceptual designs. We collaborated with the Bicycle Coalition of Maine, as well as the Bike and Pedestrian Committee. But you'll see that this follows similar treatments, particularly on Bowden and Bates. And you'll note the interruption of the dashed lines at the curve approaching West Elm right now. And then the example of what the signage is to the right already, just clarifying that it is a two-way row for users. And this is just a rendering of what it would look like. This is the existing view looking northbound at South Street and West Elm, and just the users. So you'd see that drivers are already accustomed to using the center of the roadway and leaving space. The law requires 3 feet for cyclists as well as and for pedestrians. But the bicyclists, so for example, in this image, you see that the kids would be riding northbound. They would likewise move over for the pedestrian as the faster form of traffic. We also looked at data just to get a sense of how the streets are functioning in part of the network, what the existing conditions are here. So of course, community concerns are part of that data, the crash history, speed studies, in collaboration with the police department, which also conducted traffic counts, and then looking at the prior installations on the roads we mentioned before. So there have been, thankfully, no motorist to bicycle or motorist to pedestrian crashes in the past 10 years. And Ed, thank you again for your email of support, and from a resident as well for the South Street installation. So those are all kind of part of the data capture as well, and we'll continue to look at the street after installation as well. So happily, the crash history is very minimal. You have one case actually on South Street of motorist to motorist failing to yield. And then at the end of the street towards West Elm, you have motorists, one bicyclist in a school bus incident, it was an adult bicyclist, and then you had motorists failing to yield. So even when you have a stop control and on West Elm Street, there are at least existing conditions there, but mostly that's just to driver error. And then on Main Street as well, just one motorist to motorist rear end side swipe. But that was on Main Street at South Street, so not on the roadway itself. Okay, and then speed study and traffic counts. So you'll note that there, the maximum speed, for example, is 31 miles per hour and predominantly occurred off peak. We did hear feedback about how when there are no, or when it's off peak and there are no road users, it does have the potential to become a straightaway. So that's something that we'll be looking at after installation as well. In the period that the police department was studying the street, there were 34 speed violations that occurred, predominantly off peak, but it is a very low volume road. There's data was gathered from Maine State DOT as well that confirmed the local data as far as average annual daily traffic. So the same thing can be shown for southbound drivers, we had the camera switched around, and you could see that there are higher counts of people coming into the street from Main Street as opposed to the opposite. But again, you'll see the same pattern, higher, slightly higher numbers of speed violations in off-peak hours. But predominantly, you could see from the table to the right, people are traveling the posted speed limit. So that is a good sign as well. So our next steps following this meeting is obviously to consider revising the designs based on public feedback. Our hope is that they'll be installed summer of 2023 to continue gathering data and then also to monitor implementation, specifically with attention towards the curve at West Elm Street. So that's it in a nutshell. Are there any questions or things that we might have missed, or I'll stop sharing it just to make it easier to see everyone.
It's Jackie. I don't know is that okay?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. How are you? Thank you. That was great. I'm thrilled to see the safety enhancements here and also just the speed counts that people are obeying the speed limit at those hours. That's fantastic. One thing as a pedestrian that I've noticed is the stop sign at Cumberland. You know, it's set further if you're coming from Main Street. I feel like it's a good 7 to 10 feet from the actual turn. So when I'm walking down Cumberland, I actually cross the street so that I'm actually going with traffic because cars kind of yield at that turns. I didn't know if there was any consideration how to make that corner a little bit tighter so that cars actually stop at the corner, not 10 feet back and then wait to see if there's any pedestrians coming that way. I'm sorry, it's hard to explain. If I'm not being clear, I can try differently.
No, that's perfectly clear. So stop bars are generally placed a certain distance from the intersection based on the manual of uniform traffic control devices. But if it is driver habit to pull up past there if they already know, for example, that it's hard to see simply because of the road geometry. So no, your comment makes lots of sense. It's a driver behavior. So yeah, thank you. That's something that we can look at.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I do it myself, you know, because you need to creep up to be able to see better, but it ends up being more of a slow roll and not an actual stop to make sure there's nobody coming. So, but otherwise, like that's great. The bike lanes, that's fantastic, especially at that curve toward West Elm. So thank you. It's great.
Go ahead, Ed.
Thank you, Julie. Excuse me, I may have to take this call. You know, I'm going to have to take this call. I'm sorry.
That's okay, Ed. We'll be here. Colin, did you have any suggestions?
I don't think so. You know I'm a fan. Thanks for all your work on it.
Well, extra thanks to Carrie. So hooray for new bike and ped committee members getting involved.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
Erin, did you have anything to add too?
I think one of the great pieces of or one of the greatest elements of this installation is that it begins to create a network of the advisory lanes in the village, which is an important way to support, you know, folks walking or biking on the more narrow streets where maybe perhaps the right of way is not large enough to install a sidewalk, or if we do install a sidewalk, it has sort of that perspective of eating into people's front yard, even though that is the public right of way. So by being able to provide some of these interventions on the more narrow streets in the village is just a great benefit, and we're lucky that our DPW is interested in this and has supported both the Department of Planning and Development and the Bike and Pedestrian Advisory Committee in furthering these throughout the community. So I think, unfortunately, Eric Street was unable to join us tonight, but kudos to his department as well. And it's exciting to see it happen. Our goal is to get them installed and painted on the ground before the Clam Festival. But it is sometimes dependent on the weather and dependent on contractor availability. So we will certainly get the notice out so that folks are not caught unaware of a painting truck coming down their street. So we're very excited to see this all come together. Great presentation, Julie, very succinct and straightforward.
Well, maybe we should let everyone go and finish dinner and maybe help with bedtime. I don't know how long Ed's going to be on for.
I'm going to stay here and just pretend. No, I'm just kidding. Thank you for all your hard work on it. I think there's not a lot of traffic, but it is a cut through street. So I think that advisory lanes are especially important for that. The times that I'm walking or biking and people cut close or impatient, it seems they're the ones trying to cut through. And when you cut through, you think you sort of have like the right to get through quickly. And so I think this will send a great message that everyone belongs there. So thanks.
Yeah, you'll be interested, Colin, that the data shows that the peak hours and the highest volumes, which were on that slide, are exactly when you think it is: morning rush, school arrival, and departure. So, you know, the great thing about advisory lanes is that they're out there all the time. It's not like doesn't require any other enforcement mechanism necessarily. So hopefully that'll just make it an even stronger signal to drivers that there are other road users that have every right to be there too.
It's Jackie. I guess I struggle a little bit with the term cut through, and I know exactly what you're referring to. I think when I think cut through, it's like cutting through the bank, to avoid the light, or cutting through, what latch string used to have, the throughway. And I really like, South Street, I mean, it's right off of Main Street. It connects the two major roads, in Yarmouth getting to the schools. Like, is that considered a cut through, or is it people just, I mean, we are avoiding the light. So that's one thought. And my second thought was, if we were ever to look at that light, and maybe do the 10-second delay or advance green so that it would really clear that intersection faster, just to keep the traffic moving, if less people would use South Street at, those peak times. And that is, I know that would be like probably a DOT conversation, because that's, Route 115, but I didn't know if that was ever a consideration to help ease the numbers. And I think we can't really control the number of people going on South because it is a public road, but this is a great step in controlling the speed, which I think is the concern for a lot of those residents there.
Yeah, so the volumes on the street are actually still fairly low compared to what the other network is. So that data is publicly available, Jackie. If you do want to nerd out, it's the DOT public map viewer, and you can see what they are as part of the larger town network. So usually a cut through refers to local roads that in effect become bypasses to arterials to major destinations. So for example, usually it's a commercial corridor or access to an access route to a highway. So South Street, and I think I've heard some feedback because of the West Elm Main intersection of that light, for drivers, they do see an incentive. But for cyclists, it's also just a safer, lower volume route for them to get to school. So the majority during that time period of the people I saw, even vehicles, were making that left turn to go towards down West Elm towards the school system. So it's interesting when, yeah, to your point about it's an interesting terminology when you just think of the destinations within a town and people's comfort level. So again, that information is publicly available, but I think we can take a look at, and Erin, maybe in the past, prior to me at the town, there have been discussions about that intersection, if you have any insights.
So I know that the town had considered altering the lights, at least the timing of that signal, to help school buses get through the intersection more efficiently. One of the barriers that the school bus drivers find, or difficulties really, not barrier, is that the geometry of that intersection is tough to do in a school bus. It does, I believe, require the bus to cross the double yellow line in order to make the turns. So that condition wouldn't necessarily be changed by the changing the signal timing at that light. And the reason why I bring it up is because I think one of the comments that we did hear in our consideration of the advisory lanes on South Street is the number of school buses that do use South Street to go around. It's not all school bus drivers. I think it depends on their comfort level to get through the intersection. Also anecdotally, and relative to the conversation about what a cut through is, it doesn't necessarily save time, we've heard anecdotally. So, and also when you're talking about traffic on public roads, it is something to consider of who belongs on those roads and belongs to be using those roads and things like that. So as it relates to the light, long-winded way of getting there, I think we're constantly considering how to improve the signals within the community, and we can certainly add it to the mix for future consideration, especially as we continue the improvements to the Main Street streetscape. So we'll see, but it's a good point, not only for the school buses, but also just to move traffic through that intersection more efficiently if that need arises.
Thank you so much. That is so helpful. Just to have it clear, it's the DOT public map viewer, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, when you say nerd out, that's definitely speaking my language. I definitely think about traffic flow and pedestrian traffic more than the average person. So it's very fascinating to me how people decide to move through town. So thank you. That's great.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think I was speaking from personal experience driving, biking, and walking using South Street as a cut through. But you're right, sometimes it doesn't save time. I think the thing I would say about we're sort of getting off topic, but the lights is, I feel like sometimes pedestrians have to wait already too long. So that is a concern I would just raise. If we're looking to move drivers at peak, that's also peak when like kids are trying to cross. So that's also a consideration.
I'm wondering if Ed is close to the end of his phone call.
Okay. Kind of looks like it, but maybe not.
With one of our two attendees, I feel like we need to hang out for his comment.
It looks like a totally enjoyable conversation. So I'm kind of wondering what's funny. Maybe we'll get it.
The floor is yours, Ed.
Okay, thank you. I apologize for the interruption. An old crewmate and classmate from college is going to visit us. So what I wanted to mention was that it would be my hope and really expectation that as we put the advisory lane stripings on South Street, which I think is a great idea, that it may effect a culture shift so that we don't have to put them on all of our village streets, because some people may have objections to the visual aesthetics of striping their short little street like Center or Baker. But the people get used to the idea of going to the center of the street and recognizing, and as I think they do now, with particularly with pedestrians and with the spring weather, I'm just seeing so many people out. I went to check South Street this afternoon, actually after speaking with Aaron, and I ran into, not literally, but figuratively, on Baker Street. Sarah Whitty and her husband Drew were out there, I will say walking their dogs, but I don't know if you know this, but they take in shelter dogs pending relocation and permanent homes. And these were a couple of bruisers that they were walking. They were being walked by these dogs. I mean, they were, it was a real strain. And the movements were unpredictable. So, my 5 mile an hour approach was appropriate. And it'd be my hope that with the number of advisory lanes we have in the Upper Village now, I'm trying to think of whether the Lower Village, we have it on the bridge, on Bridge Street, but I'm not sure we need too much else in the Lower Village. I think it's more in the Upper Village. That people's behavior will accommodate so that we don't need to put it on every single street. And Colin can probably speak to this, but I remember statistics. If you're a pedestrian and you get hit by a car that's going 50 miles an hour, your chances are not too good. 40 miles an hour is still pretty bad. 30, things are looking a lot better. 20, better yet. That's probably a survivable impact. So anything we can do on that score, because I know there is a tendency of people to use South Street and perhaps to some extent Center Street as a cut through. And I think this will go a long way towards effecting behavioral or cultural changes within the village while driving. That would be my hope and expectation. Thank you.
Colin, would you like to speak to that? That's.
Other than I totally agree. I think Ed's right that it's smart of us to create a network of them where it makes sense, but not overdo it, or else they don't become as effective. And I think speeding is one of the concerns that I know our committee and a lot of people in town hear a lot about. And so I think it's this is one important tool. I think there's a lot of others that the town is exploring and that we can explore to reduce those speeds. Because Ed, you're right. It's like, I just looked up the graphic. It's, at 20 miles per hour, there's a basically your chances increase exponentially every 10 miles, even from 20 to 30 to 40. I'll put a link in the chat if you want to see it. But yeah, so all I have to say is I totally agree.
Well, as much as I feel like I could certainly listen to everybody talk about, also, Jackie, to your point, traffic safety, Vision Zero, all that good stuff. I guess if there are no further comments, or Aaron, if you have anything you'd like to add before we sign out. Oh, Ed, you have something?
I'll just say that the light attendance should be taken as sort of universal acceptance of this being a good idea. And people aren't bothering to tune in because, yeah, it's going to happen and it should happen. So I would take it as a positive. That's the way I would look at it.
I like the positivity. Well, thank you, Ed and Jackie, for joining us this evening, and Colin for joining from the committee. We're looking forward to getting this completed. So as Julie had mentioned, probably late June, early July, we should have contractors out there doing the painting. But in the meantime, if you have any questions about this project or any of the projects that the department is working on, please feel free to reach out to Julie and I. We're at Town Hall and happy to talk about all the cool planning stuff that's happening in the community. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank
Good
you.
night.
Night.